Hello, folks. I want to mention a couple things before we dive into this episode. This is a conversation with some of the team over at Dapper Labs, and we recorded this 3 weeks ago, a month ago. I'm not sure, but this was not recorded a week ago. We recorded this around the time that Doodles made their Doodles 2 announcement and announced that Doodles 2 was going to be on Flow, which of course is Dapper Labs' chain. They might not phrase it like that, but that is Dapper, and the team behind Dapper, built the Flow blockchain. So we get into a bunch of good stuff here. Certainly we talk about Doodles 2. We save that a little bit for the end of the conversation. But I want to give folks a sense of why Dapper matters. In case you are newer to the space and are not familiar, the team behind Dapper built CryptoKitties, which you've probably heard of, which was the first big NFT. It broke Ethereum at the time. It overloaded the Ethereum chain. It led to the development of the ERC 721 standard, which is the typical NFT standard in many ways these days. And it led them to build Flow, this entirely separate blockchain. And we talk a little bit about why they made that decision. They then followed CryptoKitties up with Top Shot, which of course set off the latest wave and craze around NFTs at the beginning of 2021. So they are very important. They have a very important place in blockchain history. We talk about that a bit in the beginning of the episode, but then there has since been a lot of frustration around Dapper and around Top Shot in particular. So if you are a Dapper community member, audience member, if you hold Top Shot assets, I do ask them about people's concerns around oversupply and concerns around communication from the Dapper team when it comes to Top Shot and All Day and some of their sports products. So we talk about that in this interview as well. And then we have a bit of a conversation around Ticketmaster. Flow has a partnership with Ticketmaster, and I really wanted to check in on the status of that partnership and get a feel for where Ticketmaster is today when it comes to NFTs and what their plans are. So that was a really fun part of this conversation. So overall, I think it's a good one, but I wanted to context set there for folks who are coming into this a little bit colder and tease some of the fun stuff we get into in this episode for those of you who are deeper. And with that, enjoy. Hello, everyone. GM. Welcome back to another episode of Overpriced JPEGs. Folks who have been regularly tuning into this podcast know that it is sports month, loosely speaking, I would say, here at Overpriced JPEGs. All of our interviews have been centering around the world of sports and blockchain and NFTs and how do these worlds tie together. And there is really, I think, no better team to have on to talk about this today than the team I have on. I am joined by Deet, who is the CTO of Dapper Labs. Been there from the very, very early days, developed the ERC 721 standard with CryptoKitties and eventually, of course, then Top Shot. And Adam Barrick, who is 9 months into his role as VP of Sports and Business Development. Yep, I've got that right, at Dapper. And formerly was at DraftKings for many, many years. So it runs deep when it comes to the sports world and in some ways like fantasy sports world, which I think we'll sort of get into some of that as we talk about Top Shot and maybe even All Day. Thank you both so much for being here on the pod.
Great. Thanks for having us. Appreciate it.
So we all just talked about this a little bit, but I'll give the folks at home a sense of what we're going to do here. I want to talk a little bit about the origin story of Dapper and some of the trade-offs that y'all made to make Flow. Maybe we'll even get a little bit into Flow and Dapper and the difference between the two because it's much of the same team attached to it. We're of course going to talk about sports broadly. We're going to talk about Top Shot All Day, maybe some of the UFC stuff. And then at the end, I also want to talk about Doodles just briefly because it feels like I can't have the Flow team on during this time and not talk about Doodles 2 and what you guys are doing there. But before we get to all of that great content, we do need to hear a word from our lovely sponsor. Do y'all realize what's happening over at Ledger? That the #1 leader in digital asset security has teamed up with Tony Fadell, builder of the iPod, to revolutionize the experience of owning digital assets securely. They're doing this with Ledger STAX. This is the most premium product to date, and it's so user-friendly. Ledger STAX is a palm-sized device with a new e-Ink 2 display on the cover and around the spine, meaning you can view and confirm transactions at a glance. You can also customize your ledger by displaying your favorite NFT on the cover even when the device is off. Pair your new Ledger STAX with your Ledger Live to manage, earn, and hodl all your NFTs and over 500 coins. This space needs sleek user experiences, our iPod moment. And that's what Ledger has set out to do here without compromising their core promise of security. Keep your digital assets in the safest place they can be, a Ledger STAX wallet. Trust yourself with Ledger STAX and go to shop.ledger.com to pre-order your Ledger STAX now. They're shipping in April. And if you use the link in our show notes to pre-order now, you'll be helping the show as well. Thank you. I am so excited to announce that this year, Overpriced JPEGs has partnered with OpenSea, the world's leading NFT marketplace, built for everyone, creators, collectors, noobs, and experts alike. I'm an OpenSea user because they have the best selection of NFTs and a truly inclusive view of the ecosystem, supporting 8 chains and 8 global languages. I trust the systems they've put in place to keep the space safe, like copyright protection, malicious URL detection and removal, robust verification, and more. It's why they are the place to buy, sell, and create NFTs. That's right. You know OpenSea, you use OpenSea, but did you know that OpenSea now has drops? New exclusive projects launch every week from top projects and creators, and you can check them out now using the link in the show notes. They also recently introduced self-serve drops, which is in beta, and allows creators to launch their projects right on OpenSea. This drops product gives creators access to tools like rich storytelling drop pages, multi-chain support, and drop mechanic customization. The full launch for self-serve drops is coming this spring. So check out the upcoming drops on OpenSea right now using the link in the show notes and own what moves you. You'll also be supporting the show in the process. Take us back, I guess it was 2018, 4 or 5 years ago, that y'all launched Dapper/Flow. Do I have those? Is that date right, Dee?
Yeah, so 2017 was CryptoKitties.
2017.
So the end of 2017, a company called Axiom Zen created a project called CryptoKitties, and we had no idea what was going to happen. And I don't mean that in the sense of like we thought something was going to happen and then something else happened. We literally didn't know what was going to happen.
Right.
We had a bunch of meetings about what happens if no one cares. We had 0 meetings about what happens if Ethereum can't handle the load. But I guess that was what ended up happening. And so as soon as that that blew up, sort of a mainstream level of interest that NFTs took years to get back to. We got very excited, and we were in the very enviable position that the investors were reaching out to us instead of us having to go to the investors and pitch them. And so we spun out a company called Dapper Labs that took all of the people and all of the IP, all the technology that went into CryptoKitties, with the goal of turning that into a blockchain entertainment company. We always would say we're going to bring 1 billion people to Web3 technology through the power of games and entertainment. And so my first job, because we had hit a ceiling on growth on Ethereum, that we could have something like 10 to 100,000 users, and that was it. There was no possibility of getting to millions of users on that technology. And so as the CTO, my first job was, well, what technology are we going to build on? And it took us about 3 months of researching. And, in 2018, partially in the wake of CryptoKitties, but also just because I think, it was obvious that Ethereum was going to hit scaling limits at some point. There were lots of different teams building blockchains. And we were fortunate enough to have the attention such that we could talk to all of them. So we talked to 20 plus teams proposing to build blockchains. We probably read 100 white papers. And at the end of it, we came to the conclusion that we didn't like any of them. And that was a tough conclusion because, we literally had IP partners, people with, people making movies, people with sports IP, animation, all sorts of stuff saying, hey, we want you to build what you built with CryptoKitties, but using our IP. And I was coming back to the business team and saying, you can't sign any of those deals because there is no technology we can build on that's going to scale to a consumer audience that isn't more trouble than it's worth to build on. And so, so they said, well, now what, right? And I said, well, we just talked to all the smartest people in the space. We just read all the best ideas in the space. Like, why don't you give me and this team a couple months to see if we can crack it, see if we can come up with something that matters, like given the thing we're trying to do, right? Consumer scale, really interesting applications with, on-chain logic and what we would call a decentralized app now, although that term hadn't taken on yet. What could we build? And what came out of that was Flow. And I think it's funny because I don't know what to say about this, because everyone has this idea that Flow is not decentralized, that somehow Flow is like, that the trade-off we made was between, ease of use and decentralization, and we went with ease of use. That is true of Dapper. That is 100% true of Dapper and Top Shot. We said, look, those things, the user-facing parts of it, right? In these early days, we need to start with a very comfortable onboarding experience. And so the wallet we built is, in fact, centralized. We hold the keys because people lose their keys and they don't want to have to think about those 12 words. But Flow is highly decentralized, and in fact, that's one of the primary features that we were looking for in a chain to build on, is that the at its foundation, it was fundamentally decentralized.
Isn't there a concern about how many of the Flow nodes are controlled by Dapper, or maybe it's not Dapper, but by Flow? Like, isn't there a concentration of how many nodes are being run by a single entity?
Yeah, so we don't run very many nodes at all, actually. We run, fewer than a third of the nodes. And so most of the nodes are run by other entities. It is the case that we vet the people who are running the nodes because it's a whole new blockchain, right? Like, we built a brand new blockchain and it's all new code. And so there are aspects of the security and of the BFT that aren't done yet. Or haven't been, sort of fully baked yet. And so, the last thing we want is to build a system that's going to be prone to hacks, prone to security outages, prone to uptime problems. And so we've been very thoughtful about choosing partners that are both willing and capable of operating effectively. But these aren't people that are in our pocket, right? Like Samsung runs a node, Deutsche Telekom runs a node, right? Like, it's not like these are all just, our friends. These are, in some cases they're partners and investors, but in other cases these are companies that have absolutely, no need for us to tell them what they're doing. And all the way down to like individuals running single nodes, but again, people that we have a history with and know we can trust them to not be malicious and or just let their node rot.
But I think it's valuable that you've made that distinction and help, because I do think there's misunderstandings around that. I think some of the other parts that contribute to a sense of centralization is also, you all are very protective over who can build on Flow, and there's usually a review of the code of anybody who's new, who's coming onto Flow, and I think
again that was a security thing, right? So one of the advantages of Flow, and honestly, the hardest decision we made in Flow we decided to come up with a new programming language called Cadence. Solidity is a garbage fire. I think anyone who's written Solidity knows that it's very problematic. And like, no slag on them, right? Like, no one had written a smart contract before the first smart contract programming language. Like, how else could you, like, the first version, of course, isn't going to be perfect. We felt like going with Rust and WASM was going the wrong direction, right? Like, there are things that are unique about blockchain that other programming languages don't think about. And if you actually look at Rust implementations on whether it's Cosmos or Solana, the code is more complex, not less complex than what Solidity looks like. Cadence goes the other way. Cadence has built into it the idea of ownership. Who owns this thing, right? That is a fundamental property of the language. Access controls, what security you have, what you can do, whether or not, if it was a CryptoKitty, whether or not you can breed with it or not breed with it, whether or not you own it, whether or not you, if you put something in a marketplace, whether or not you can take it back, who's responsible. Again, that's something baked right into the language. And so, since it was net new code, a brand new language, going out and saying, hey, anyone who wants to can put out a smart contract, we felt irresponsible. And so up until 2020, end of 2021, early 2022, we would do security reviews for free for anyone who wanted to deploy on mainnet. Or we would accept, if you wanted to go and pay an auditor to get your thing audited, we would absolutely accept that. We gave all of the top auditors who understood Cadence code, we gave them deployment keys so that they could deploy the code. But as of it's been a year now since that we've had that, and so anybody can deploy with no interaction with us whatsoever.
Also helpful, thank you. And for what it's worth, like I don't actually, personally, like I don't have a problem, even if it were like, hey, yeah, we review all the code on here because we stand for a certain kind of branding, or we're a family-friendly chain, or whatever it is. Like, I'm definitely of the mind of like different strokes for different folks, and like let's have solutions that work for different projects for a variety of different reasons, and I'm a big fan of Cryptoys, who builds on y'all, and we'll bring up Cryptoys a little bit later in some of the things that they're doing. And and I've gone back and forth on where I stand with like, one chain will come to just completely dominate forevermore versus we'll live in a cross-chain world. And I've gone back and forth. I think now it's looking increasingly like cross-chain is what we're seeing. And I'm curious y'all's thoughts on this. We see projects like Pudgy Penguins, who I know is doing some cross-chain stuff. You've got DGods moving from Solana to ETH and Polygon, but we'll probably have some cross-chain properties there. Doodles, of course, being the biggest and the latest one, who now has one set of their project on ETH and then another on Flow. Like, how do you guys think of the future? Do you see it as being a very multi-chain world, and Flow as being one node within that multi-chain world that services a certain type of consumer or a certain type of project? Or are you like, F the rest of them and we want to be number one? Like, how do you think about it?
I think there are network effects for blockchains that will lead to a certain amount of consolidation. But like, even when there are really strong network effects, it hardly ever goes to one, right? Like there's always, some number
usually a duopoly, you got Coke and Pepsi.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But even in like Coke and Pepsi, like there's other options out there, like either for soda or even just, like I guess they're mostly off-brand, but like they exist. And so I do think it's likely to be a power law. I do think it's likely to be that there's a relatively small number, low single-digit number of chains that most people think about at most times. But that doesn't mean that there's not going to be many other chains for many other kinds of things. But what I think is striking is the strength of the network effects that come from composability. And I think the strongest example of this is DeFi on Ethereum, where, at its like absolute, like, burning fire peak, people were spending, $50, $100 per transaction to do DeFi on Ethereum when, lots of other blockchains were saying, hey, we've got DeFi too, and our transaction fees are, less than 10 cents, maybe in some cases even less than a penny. And yet, like, the volume didn't move over. And that's because of those network effects. And so I think it's important to understand, like, I don't know exactly how that's going to fall out, right? I tend to think the network effects are going to be very powerful. And I think that once an ecosystem develops, gets a foothold, that there's just going to be a lot of value in building on top of that. And so I think that moving a project or moving an audience is going to be very difficult. The question is how does the audience fragment, right? Like, are the gamers going to be the same people as the NFT collectors, going to be the same people as the people engaging in DeFi? And if those have very little overlap in them, then absolutely, those could be, completely different communities on completely different technology. But if the overlap is high, like, I think then you'll potentially see even more of those network effects kicking in.
So last question before we, Adam, get you in here, give you an opportunity to get grilled.
No.
So I guess it's sort of a two-part question. One, how do you feel about where Flow is tracking? If you think there is a power law effect that's going to take place here, do you feel like Flow is where you want it to be, where it needs to be to win in that power law game? And I guess maybe a similar question to that is, has your thinking on Ethereum scaling evolved at all? I know you're not a sharding fan, but like, has it evolved? Are you still very cynical about Ethereum's scaling plan now that, we have more layer 2s that have been built since, 2017, et cetera?
Yeah, I mean, I'll start with the first one. I mean, I think, I remember I told you how we decided that we needed to build Flow rather than just, use the sort of blockchain du jour. That was so much work. And I think I think somehow I got stuck in my mind that everyone else would do that much work too, right? Like that like if we built a technology that when you went and spent like a really long time examining it, you would come away impressed. That was all we needed to do, right? Like if you build it, they will come. And I felt like every time I talked to somebody who would dig into flow, right? Whether they would, no matter which aspect they cared about, whether or not they were interested in the smart contracts or the consensus or the way that dApps got built and the way they interact with the chain and construct transactions. Every time someone would look into it, they come away and they're like, wow, you guys have done a great job here. Like, I like your thinking. You've really been thoughtful about this. But the problem is people don't have the time for that, right? And I was not going out. We had no one on our team going out and going to the conferences. Again, COVID helped there, but like being on Twitter and just like being part of the conversation and going out and telling people this rather than hoping that people will come and discover it. So, that's a complete turnaround that we're doing right now on the team. And we're focusing we're focusing our hiring on people who are going to help us tell that story because we think we have a great story. But we were very naive, possibly even a little, what's the word I'm looking for? A little overly proud, thinking that people would just come and see what we've done without us having to tell them about it. And so that's like a real focus for us. In terms of like critical mass, like, I don't know, man. Like it's a weird thing. Like, when you sign up 1 million people to say that you don't have enough critical mass is a tough thing. But at the same time, like we haven't done a great job of turning that 1 million people who signed up for Dapper into people who understand that this is an ecosystem and not an application. And that's another area where we want to really put effort into that. There is no silver bullet there. There's just a lot of little things that we have to do. But that's another area where I think we're going to do a lot better in the near future. And then the second part of the last question, sorry, can you repeat again?
It was just your evaluation on Ethereum scaling today, and if it's evolved at all since 2018, 2017, when you were thinking about this.
Well, I mean, Ethereum's plans have changed dramatically since then, right? So in 2017, it was promised that 2018 was going to be the year of proof of stake.
So did the plans change, or did they just take 4x longer than anticipated?
No, the plans changed, and in part because of CryptoKitties, right? So Ethereum was running at about 80% capacity before CryptoKitties launched. CryptoKitties launched, it used about 1/3 of the gas, about 20% of transactions. So it pushed it well over the capacity. And so 2018 very quickly became the year of performance. And so the focus turned entirely to sharding. And again, I don't want to go into the technical details of sharding, but the short version is it makes it very hard for application developers to build applications in a secure way, and it creates a bunch of complexity that can lead to problems, whether lost assets or just like stuck smart contracts. And so we were really counter to sharding and the difficulty it had with composability. I feel like it took a couple of years for the Ethereum community to really appreciate that, but they did. And so I guess it was the end of 2021 when Vitalik basically said, look, the plan for Ethereum is we're not going to talk about sharded execution. We'll talk about data availability shards. So yes, we're going to have this sharded blockchain running on proof of stake, but the shards are just going to be a place where the transactions live before these layer twos
not
execute
the execution
them.
layer. Yeah.
And what's fascinating about that is that it's an example of convergent execution. That is, in a nutshell, Flow's architecture, right? Flow's architecture that we came up with in 2018 was, why don't you have a bunch of little guys just putting the transactions together and assigning them in order, and then have another set of computers that are actually executing that. And because the computers that are executing that, they need to have tons of RAM, tons of storage, tons of CPU. But the computers that are engaged in consensus and like setting up the order of the transactions, the more the merrier, right? Like that's where you get your decentralization. And so honestly, if you look at Arbitrum or Optimism, and if you just like map the terms, where what we call a collection node is called a data availability shard on Ethereum. What we call a consensus node is the beacon chain. What they call a sequencer is our execution nodes. It's a very, very similar architecture. And so At some level, like I think that's good, right? Like obviously, I like that architecture, right? We built a whole system around it. It's also gratifying because, like, I don't know, you build something
validating.
new. Yeah, exactly. Like you build something new. Are you sure it works? Well, Vitalik thinks it's going to work, so that's very encouraging. And so, the thing that I remain somewhat skeptical about with the layer twos on Ethereum is like right now moving data between those layer twos is cumbersome and slow. I think the settlement time is something like 2 weeks or something like that, which is okay if you're moving assets, but it's not okay if you have applications that are trying to
playing a game and you need to be
2 weeks. Yeah. And so
very long game of chess, it's one move at a time.
And so I'm a little like, I don't know what's going to happen there, like whether or not you'll actually end up with like like a thriving ecosystem, multiple L1s, and so the total throughput, L2s, where the total throughput of the system is the sum of all those L2s, or whether or not you'll just end up with like sort of a aggregation where most of the stuff is going to go into the same place, and that thing is just going to be the new limit for scalability. And if it is, then they're going to run into all the problems that we've been solving over the last 3 years, and so I think those are all solvable problems because we're solving them. But I think that fundamentally they'll end up with an architecture that looks very similar to ours.
Okay, I lied. I am going to ask one more question that's more directed at Deet, but it will segue us beautifully into.
I'm going to jump in and just.
You need the answer to Adam. It'll apply across the board. You mentioned, I think in not this past answer, but the answer before, like, wanting to educate people around the fact that if you're playing Top Shot or when people first onboarded to Top Shot, that this is actually an ecosystem. It's not just like one app. I think there is a blurred line between Dapper and Flow and where one stops and where one starts. And I'm curious, Steve, for you, like how much of your time is spent thinking about Flow and the technicalities there, and how much of your time is spent thinking about Dapper and fixing something on the Top Shot marketplace or whatever. Like how is your day-to-day spent? Where is your brain power really exerted these days?
Yeah, I mean, in the early days, it was literally thirds, right? Working, a third on Dapper Wallet and how we were going to solve that problem of bridging as seamlessly as possible for people, using credit cards and interacting with on-chain assets. Obviously, Top Shot with all of the, building a whole new NFT standard and whatnot on a new chain and a new language, and then Flow itself. As time has gone on, I've focused more and more on Flow, and at this point in time, I'm more engaged as a Flow expert on the other teams than I am an expert on how those systems were originally built. But of course, we have lots of really strong team members there. As the CTO, I'm still like the head of the engineering org, and so like I'm involved in capacity planning and resourcing and all of that sort of stuff. But as a technical architect, I'm almost 100% Flow now, and I think that's natural, right? Like in business theory, there's this idea that integrated solutions are typically the first to market. Most successful in early markets because everything works together so seamlessly. And in the long run, modular systems are the solution. And we designed everything we built to be modular, but we built it in an integrated way, like integrated mindset in the first version, right? So the first version of Dapper and Top Shot, they actually had a custom API that they used to talk to each other, right? Now they are using the standard, what we call FCL, which is sort of the equivalent to Web3.js. That dApps use to talk to wallets, right? So we built that abstraction layer in as time went on. And as time has gone on, Flow has become much more of an independent thing. It's so gratifying to see like not just Dapper employees building on it, right? And building it, right? Like we have, community development calls where, we have folks that are, outside of Dapper, never been employees of Dapper who are, contributing to all of the design and whatnot that's happening. So I think as we go over time, Flow is just going to keep becoming more and more independent of Dapper, and I think hopefully people are going to start to see that, because again, that was how it was intended to work all along. But when we're coming to market, we felt that people were going to be much more interested in what the consumers could do rather than just sort of this abstract technology under the hood.
Okay, let's it's not even really switch gears here, but let's turn to the sports side of this and things. And I'm not one to usually ask, like I don't like being like, oh, what's your background per se? I mentioned you've been in sports for a long time, but I guess Adam, I am curious for you, given that you worked in sports, at DraftKings, and I think you were at the Mets. Did you work for the Mets? Did I see?
I did. I actually grew up a diehard Mets fan. So you talk about first full-time job.
Wow, that is a dream.
I hit the lottery right out of the gate.
Amazing. Well, and so I'm curious, what drew you just philosophically to this idea of like sports and blockchain?
I've always sort of been at the intersection of media and tech and sports, throughout my entire career, as you alluded to. And during my time at DraftKings, what I was really, really fortunate to do was be in a role in a highly innovative nascent space at an industry leader and be in a position where you literally are defining what that experience around, in that instance, regulated gaming is going to be for large IP holders at the league level, at the media level, teams, athletes, what have you. And to really work with them in like cultivating them realizing, hey, this is a very important fan touch point that we need to develop in order to grow our fans base, diversify our fan base, incrementally engage them over time. I really, really enjoyed that. And I think when you talk about sort of the convergence of gaming and media, and towards the latter end of my time there, you were talking about streaming rights that were specific to gaming operators and things like that, to really create that experience hand in hand with the decision makers at large IP holders was something I really, really enjoyed and something I was incredibly fortunate to do. And when I was thinking about sort of what would appeal to me in a next opportunity, this, the Web3, specifically the NFT space, checked pretty much all of those boxes, right? And I think when it comes down to it, really changing the way and creating a new way for sports fans and sports IP holders to really engage their fans, and for fans to engage the sports that they love, and to really play a role in creating that experience is something that I saw was an enormous opportunity in this space that I felt confidently that, hey, my experience doing that in a similar space would be very applicable here. So as I mentioned, I've been at Dapper for 9 months, and the types of conversations, the types of relationships, ultimately what we're doing with all of our large partners is exactly that. We're really creating a new way for fans to engage with sports that they love, right? Whether it's traditionally been watching a sport on TV or a streaming device, or going to a sport, collecting an NFT, collecting a Top Shot moment, an all-day moment. It truly is a new way for sports fans to really to passionately identify their fandom. And for the leagues on the flip side, it's an incredibly relevant way for them to engage with current fans and new fans in an incredibly relevant way, in a way that's obviously heavily digitally centric. So I think, from my perspective, that's what really gets me out of bed in the morning. The thought of working with our various product communities and relaying a lot of that sentiment and feedback in the way we're cultivating our rights holder relationships, and ultimately creating the experience that our collectors and our community engage with on a daily basis.
It's a new opportunity, and it's also like the oldest opportunity of all time in some ways, right? Like collectibles is such an old, it's innate to human nature to want to collect things. And, when people think about collectibles, I think like baseball cards are like the most iconic collectible. And so that sports card collecting is also something that, we've seen for however long we've seen it, centuries, let's call it. I think there's, Top Shot was obviously such a hugely important moment for this whole space. Dapper, y'all have done it twice. You did it with CryptoKitties. You've done it again with Top Shot. At the end of this conversation, I'll ask you, what's next? What's the third one? But it obviously has seen some declines since its highs when it first launched. And there's pretty big concerns around oversupply being one, and then second, around the way that y'all have communicated out to fans and feeling like there have been promises that have been made that were never kept, and sort of confusion about what's really next, and there's been some trust loss there.
Yeah.
What do you think of that, and what needs to change moving forward in your view?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I think a couple things. I think we obviously, and we work closely with the NBA and NFL and All Day as well. I think everyone with Top Shot was extraordinarily pleased with the performance and everything we saw at the outset, right? I think what we're experiencing right now, there are obviously a significant amount of macro headwinds that we're very equipped to navigate, and I think we're using this time to really make sure we're optimizing that collector experience in and around our products. But I also think we realize, to your earlier point, right, the notion of collecting and collectability, it stood the test of time, right? And I think that behavior, that mindset really evolves and morphs in tandem with sort of broader collector and consumer behavior. And I think from our perspective, I can tell you on a daily basis, micro daily basis, we are listening to our community. We're taking that feedback, and we're identifying ways we can implement it, incorporate it into our product offering, right? And I think we're in the early days of this, right? I think back to what I said about the large amount of success, we all saw with Top Shot out of the gate. It put sort of sports NFTs on the map, right? It was you're talking about
it put NFTs on the map in some ways. No,
100%. 100%. Yeah. And I think you talk about iconic IP with a top-notch product experience, and you saw sort of the early, the early success that we had. But I also think we never, and Dee can speak to this, but we never created Top Shot or any of our products as immediate success and then live it day by day. We're building long-term collector experiences, long-term, consumer experiences, and in tandem with our partners, building long-term businesses that we want to make sure we're setting up for long-term success. And like I said earlier, a major part of that is making sure we're listening to the community, listening to the collectors to make sure that their voice is heard and their voice is represented in changes that we're making. So I think we're certainly cognizant of a number of the things that you mentioned in terms of lack of communication or elements of trust been lost. I can tell you those are things that are top of mind for us. And I think when you look at how we're managing oversupply and managing the broader, not just Top Shot, but all of our product economies, making sure that we still feel like we're delivering the amount of value that our collectors want by partaking in our products is of the utmost importance to that. And I don't mean that from a monetary perspective, because these aren't speculative products. These are means for people to reflect and demonstrate their fandom. And it's the benefits of ownership and rewards that come with them, and IRL experiences that they can derive by owning a moment and things like that we're hyper focused on. And we're definitely thinking the long game with this. And I think for us, it's a matter of straddling, navigating the macro headwinds that we're dealing with now, wanting to deliver in real time a top-notch experience for our community and our collectors, while making sure that we're making the correct decisions for the longevity of the product and the longevity of the business, which ultimately is going to be to the benefit of the long term of the community.
You say it's not a speculative instrument, which of course, good, yes, and yep. I'm sure your lawyer is happy to hear that as well. But I think, is that part of the challenge here, is that the initial wave of people and the initial enthusiasm around Top Shot was certainly in no small part because there was this amazing dynamic where you could get these pack drops and be almost guaranteed to be able to flip them for money. And is part of what needs to happen here, is it a marketing to traditional card holders who do hold it for the love of having the card more than maybe for the speculative nature of it? Is that that part of the goal in this, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, I think when you talk about ultimately where the long-term engagement is going to be derived from, it's going to be derived from fans, right? It's going to be derived from people who are authentically passionate about whatever the theme of our studio project is. So if it's Top Shot, it's basketball. If it's All Day, it's football, right? So on and so forth. And I think we've always thought about it from that mindset. Again, thinking about the longevity of the product and building something that has long-term staying power, and building something with our partners and in tandem with our community that has long-term staying power, trying to appeal to a cohort of people who are looking at it from a short-term perspective, that there's misaligned incentive there, right? So I think we've always been looking at it from the perspective of we want to add another level of enjoyment for people or for fans with sports that they love, or whatever sort of studio product that we're creating. You create that correlation there. So I think from our perspective, like the strategy and the way we're sort of going to market and engaging the community, I wouldn't say there's like a seismic shift in our strategy from day one to where we are now. I think you're just seeing a sort of prevalence of behavior, manifest itself. And I think some of it's been expedited just by, a lot of the macro headwinds that we're going through right now. But, we're a product, and an experience for the fans. And that is, something that we won't deviate from. That's a core tenet of our product.
Well, one of the things I've told the teams plural from the beginning, right? Going back to CryptoKitties, Cheese Wizards, which you didn't mention, which was also built on Ethereum, didn't make quite as much attention as CryptoKitties, but it was a game, an NFT-based game that ran entirely on chain that we did in 2019. But Top Shot, I've constantly said to the team that if the number of people, there's two ways to get values out of owning one of these, out of these NFTs, right? You get value from owning it because you love it, you care about it, it feels good to have that ownership, or you get value from selling it, right? Because it's an investment. And if we don't focus on getting the people who are owning it, who are getting the value from owning it, if those people don't exist and make up the lion's share of our audience, we are just creating a bubble. And that can't be what we're here for. Because it doesn't mean we don't have a sustainable business, but it also means that we're like not creating good things in the world. Now, with both CryptoKitties and I think even to a certain extent Top Shot, I think that there was a wave of people that came in that overwhelmed the true owners and the collectors, and ended up distorting the market or just like confusing the market. And I think that we have, like I said, is something I've been saying to the team was for years now. And I think the fact that we're a team that understands that from day one, have been talking about that from day one, means that we're going to get back to that place where people really understand that this is a collector's product and it's about owning it, not just flipping it.
Do you think there's something extra challenging about that when you add the digital on-chain component of it? I've been thinking about, and I want to talk to you guys about a little bit the difference between like fantasy sports or what like a So Rare is doing, and then like a purely collector's market, which is, more along the lines of what Dapper is doing. You guys have gamification elements. It's sort of collectors on steroids in some sense, right? But it's more along those collecting lines than along like the fantasy or sports betting lines. And is there a challenge, which is that in the physical sports card industry, you don't necessarily know the supply. And I've been advised that at this point you could probably go online and find the supply, but like that wasn't a part of the initial dynamic with sports cards. So you almost had this advantage of like obfuscated information. And when you're dealing with sports cards that are on a blockchain and you can see the supply at all times, it psychologically changes the dynamic in a way that makes it more challenging. Like, what do you guys think of that?
Yeah, it's a very interesting point. And I would say, yeah, right. Like obviously the transparency, of Web3, affords the community and the collector base, real-time insight into sort of the health of sort of the economy, the greater economy, and then also, much more insight, obviously, into overarching supply. I think from our perspective, obviously, like the benefits of that type of transparency far outweigh what you just described, which could be perceived as a negative, where like, hey, a cohort of collectors may choose not to engage because they look at sort of the supply-demand ratio and they're like, whoa. I think from our perspective, like that is something we always are and will be, transparent with. And I think the benefits of that transparency and long-term, you're talking about a nascent industry that is moving towards mainstream adoption. That element of trust and transparency is going to be a benefit more than it's ever going to be a detriment in order to sort of drive mainstream adoption and scale, over time.
Is there anything y'all can share, and maybe the answer is no, but around the expectations of the leagues, and sort of, I've heard speculation around like, is part of the problem with oversupply that you've got licensing deals with the NBA and they're sitting there going, hey, we need you to kick back X dollars to us every month. And so you're like, we're kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place. We need to keep putting out products because we got to make these payments. We lose our license. Like, is there a dynamic there? Blink twice if that, no, just kidding, if that's what's happening. What can you share around that?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I can tell you this. I have discussions with all of our partners on a daily basis. And a big reason we've selected the partners and the partners have selected us is because of that ironclad belief that we are building something long-term. And Deet and I were talking the other day, and he even mentioned, obviously, our relationship with the NBA predates my time here, but ultimately, one of the big reasons we determined that working together would make sense was because of that belief. Hey, long-term growth. We're building this is a fan and collector experience that has staying power, will be long-term, and to think about it purely from to make decisions or run the partnership / business in a way that is totally predicated on near-term sort of revenue goals or requirements, or however you want to categorize them, would not be to the benefit of the longevity of it. So I can tell you, like, all of our partners, are vested in this long term. They're all incredibly understanding that there are I keep bringing it up, but like there are macro headwinds that we're all experiencing right now, but they are truly unwavering in their belief in our partnership, in Dapper as being their partner, we're in a fortunate position to be a leader in the space. And long term, they are unwavering in their belief that the notion of digital collectibles is a fan experience that's going to continue to gain momentum. And it's a way for them to engage with and grow their fans in an extremely relevant way.
So I feel like what I hear you saying is like, no, you're not under crazy, like under the thumb constraints of these league partners who are actually giving you the space to breathe and do what you need to do.
Correct. I think, it's very accurate to say that.
I want to talk about the future of these products. I mean, we've been focused sort of on Top Shot, but all day, et cetera. So one specific question is the one I alluded to earlier, which is, would you guys think about adding a fantasy component? I mean, that's what Rainmakers is doing at your alma mater, not being the right word, but whatever you would call it, right? Like your alma mater DraftKings, right? You have So Rare that's doing quite well. That's seen pretty great growth, even in this bear market and in sort of tough macro conditions. Like, is that something you guys have thought about or think about?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think, I mentioned it earlier, right? I think we're at this really interesting period of time where a number of nascent and innovative industries, there's a convergence going on, so to speak, right? And you could make the argument, not make the argument, it's true. Media is a legacy industry that's growing and innovating and modernizing real time, right? And you look at how media is converging with the gaming space. You look at how media is converging with our space, right? Like we have video, digital products, right? Those are media rights, essentially. And I think from our perspective, that our space is in such an, I guess, infancy stage, that there's going to be there's a core experience that obviously some of the larger players are focused on, right? You mentioned SellRare and Rainmakers, which are obviously heavily focused on sort of fantasy as the driver of that experience. You look at what we've done, obviously, the video elements and rewards and benefits tied to that, but that being the core experience is really what we're focused on. I think there are some very obvious like companion behaviors that are part of this industry now and that will continue to develop. So I think like we think about gamification and a lot, but I don't think the notion of gamification necessarily means just fantasy, right? It can mean free games. It can mean mini games. There's a variety of different things that can mean. And there's value that a collector can derive from that experience, even if it's not the core experience, right? So I think and back to what I said earlier, we're constantly gauging collector sentiment and community feedback and sort of how we're thinking about the longer term evolution of our product. And yes, like behaviors like gaming and others are things that we talk about a lot, much like I'm sure, others are talking about, hey, how can we make our static NFTs more dynamic via video or some other form of multimedia, right? So I think long short of it is like I don't think like there needs to be a core experience driving it, and that's the end all be all. I think you can have that core experience, in our case, video, be the driver still, and still create ancillary companion behavior that drives significant amount of value and interest and fun for the collector.
So it's very clear that you're thinking for the long term, as you said a bunch, and maybe reading between the lines, there's an element of like, look, yes, things are imperfect right now, and there's probably even immediate concerns that we're not addressing, but that's because like we're putting a lot of building blocks in place for what we, to have something that can stand the test of time. But I think your licenses go till like 2030 or something, like we have like 7 years at least that we're looking to do here. So that's sort of what I'm hearing and what you're saying. What can you share? Are there things you can share about what's coming up next for All Day, for any of the products really within the Dapper Sports suite? Again, I don't know as much about your UFC partnership, to be honest, but if you want to share something there, like what can you share about Top Shot All Day and what's coming down the pike?
Some of the things we've introduced over the last month or so with Top Shot, focus on like sort of net neutral circulation supply and making sure that, to your earlier point, we're being very cognizant of how supply is being put into the community and into the economy and what that means for economy health. I think that's going to continue to be a very heavy focus of ours.
Like locking, like are you talking about locking dynamics that you have in that where folks, and for anybody who maybe isn't into the Top Shot community, like who's listening, right? Like there's opportunities now where if you lock your cards, you lock them up for a year, so they're no longer in supply, and you can get rewards. It's sort of like a staking mechanism in other communities, and you gain rewards for locking up your card, so it's taking things out of supply to help deal with those issues. Correct.
And then to take that a step further, I think as we think about our products longer term, whether it's a locking mechanism, whether it's some sort of trade mechanism, burning, things like that, I think we're hypersensitive as we learn more about our product experience and the community and the economy associated with that. We're constantly going to be optimizing that experience across the board. And then I think also when you look at leaderboards too, which we introduced in sort of a new way. I think we realized when we introduced that, we could have been clearer on the communication of what that meant for you being a collector. So I think when we're introducing new features and functionalities, I think a learning from that was clearly, hey, we need to make sure we're clearly communicating and articulating the why this is a benefit to you as a collector. And ultimately, the decision is yours whether you want to take advantage of that or not. But I think as we think through sort of the next phase of all of our products, it really is, I'd say those are two areas of emphasis, not just for Top Shot. Like Top Shot, obviously, we've introduced those recently. But I think as we think about the evolution of All Day, you mentioned Strike. We've recently launched our Galazos product with La Liga. We do have elements of continuity in terms of features, functionality that I wouldn't say we definitely don't blindly apply across all four, but hey, if there's things that are working, we take the data, things that's going to work with another sport, we do that. But we also realize we take a very bespoke approach with each of our products too, knowing the fan bases are different, knowing that the experience of watching an NBA event in person is much different than watching a La Liga match in person. And being a fan of both of those things can mean different things, and making sure that how we're articulating that engagement, whether it's through marketing and messaging or whether it's through the product experience, is done in a way that feels authentic to that sport, right? So I think as we have our core portfolio of sports, I think sports and media and entertainment in general, it's a space we've found success with leaning into to bring NFT and blockchain into the mainstream, and it's going to be a space that we continue to double down on, for the foreseeable future.
I think something else that I know really excites me and excites many others when it comes to, call it the sports blockchain intersection, but it goes even beyond sports, is our tickets. And this is like what you hear again and again as like the no-brainer is tickets should be NFTs. It makes them better, more fun to collect. It
Yep.
proves your sports fandom. It's such a no-brainer. And it was so cool. I know Ticketmaster has issued 10 million NFTs or something at this point that I think is so under the radar to so many folks that people do not realize how much Ticketmaster has actually in some ways leaned into tickets. Yep. And my sense or my understanding is that's essentially all been through Flow, and you all are the Ticketmaster partner here. Yep. I would love to know the current status of that partnership. What maybe future plans are there? I don't know, either of you. And then also, if there's any data or stats you can share about, the 10 million tickets that have been issued. Did people claim them? Were they onboarded? What is there anything we can know about all these tickets that were issued that are apparently out there in the ether, but I'm not really sure what the follow-on effect from that has been.
Yeah, I can speak.
A lot of questions in one, so take them as you want to, but.
A two-part question in 3 parts.
Exactly.
No, we love our relationship with Ticketmaster, right? And we really introduced it last year around commemorative tickets at the Super Bowl, and have continued that, throughout the year, with a variety of events that Ticketmaster, manages across the entertainment spectrum, right? Like sports is obviously an area we focused on. But in the music space too, we've been working closely with them on creating commemorative NFT-based tickets, throughout the calendar year as well. I think we're very, very pleased with what we've seen with the relationship thus far. I think from our perspective, being a very data-oriented testing sort of centric company, we're in the process now, I think, of really looking at, hey, what we've done with them over the past 12 months and really thinking through, okay, as the NFT space has evolved in isolation, what does that mean in terms of what we can do with a more traditional, physically focused asset industry, and what can we do to add value to the ticket holder by virtue of that ticket being an NFT. So there's definitely going to be more to come on that. I think, big benefit.
What's the answer? What value can you?
I think it's tying. I mean, from my perspective, and some of the things, I know we've kicked around on our side, is really bridging that experience between the digital experience and the IRL experience, right? So what sorts of benefits could potentially be unlocked at an event, specifically and exclusively to you, because your ticket is via an NFT. So I think,
for example, is it something where maybe if you go to the game and you have this NFT ticket, that NFT ticket now unlocks some behind the scenes. I think of the so and so mic'd up. The football teams do that thing where one of the players is mic'd up, and maybe get exclusive access to a mic'd up behind the scenes thing. Is that along the lines of, or you can redeem it for 20% off merch? Is that the direction you guys are thinking?
I think all those things are concepts that make sense longer term, and as we think about to your follow-up, what that value add is to the ticket holder by virtue of that ticket being an NFT, those sorts of benefits that you can redeem instantaneously or close to instantaneously, are how we're thinking about it. So again, merch, concessions, experiences. I wouldn't say there's anything on the near-term horizon with that, but I think as we think about it philosophically, yes, like that is the direction we want to take this. And being in a very advantageous spot where we sit based on the relationships we have with leagues. Obviously, ticketing is an innate part of sporting events and whatnot. Being able to be a leader in sort of driving that is something that we're taking seriously, and we see as a big opportunity longer term.
Why is that a longer term? Why not do that faster? Is it the leagues putting the brakes on it, or because that is such a huge opportunity where you're like, okay, you've got all these sports fans who may or may not actually care about blockchain at all. Maybe they hate NFTs, and this is an opportunity to say, oh, hey, you know what? Actually, here's this cool example of a thing you can do because you have an NFT. Why not do that?
So
yeah,
I can I jump in, Adam? Because I think one of the dynamics that's important to understand here is that we are supporting Ticketmaster, but Ticketmaster is building on Flow. They're building their own technology on the open platform, and we're helping them, right? We want to see Flow succeed. But it's not like our arrangement with the NFL and the NBA where we license their IP and then those are our products. And so there was a certain amount of what Ticketmaster did that they just did. Like that's their product, that's their business, right? And so that simultaneously explains why we have to be thoughtful about how we're integrating in with it, because we have no control over it. They're just doing what they do, and then we need to interact with that. But it also, I think, really emphasizes why I talk about ecosystems and why I talk about composability, because we didn't need permission from Ticketmaster in order, to consider all of these integrations. And anybody else who wants to build on Flow or just wants to access the data on Flow is able to get all of this information that we can layer into our applications. And so that's why I get excited about Ticketmaster, is because it is completely independent from what the rest of what we're doing.
Yeah.
So that's helpful. Do you get this? Do they get it? I feel that's the question, and they're a partner of yours, so I'm sure, there's a certain amount of finessing you have to do, and you're not going to, tell me they don't. But do they really see that long-term opportunity, or are they doing this to hedge their business in some way? Or, do you have a sense there that you can give us?
They definitely see the long-term opportunity. I think, back to what you mentioned earlier, hey, why not right now? I think it goes back to, hey, the notion of this being an activity that is being brought into the mainstream, and making sure that when we bring a large-scale, very important experience like a commemorative ticket, unlocking some sort of benefit for you, that experience is it's seamless, and it's very easy for the mainstream to understand, right? And I think, the phrase goes, you only have one time to make a first impression, right? If we feel hey, if we rush that and it's a subpar experience for whatever reason, you lose that. You potentially lose.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Please. We've seen so many people who've clearly been burned. Just make it good when 10 million people finally get their special extra experience. Make it good.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, fair enough. And just to the last note on this, and maybe this is out there and I just don't know it, but what does that look like? If I went to the game, what did it look like to get one of these tickets? That 10 million tickets issued number, are they actually out there? That was the total number that they could have, or that's actually what's been redeemed? And is this a Dapper wallet that people now have? What was that experience specifically for folks who went to games where Ticketmaster issued tickets?
They're tickets, commemorative tickets. So after the event, they would get an email where they'd have the ability to redeem that commemorative ticket. So again, being in the very early stages of this sort of marriage of ticketing and NFTs, it very much is a keepsake, a reminder. I could tell you, up in my office, I have a bag of tickets from concerts and events that I've gone to because I'm a collector. Right? Exactly. So I think it's very much that sort of mindset. But I think as that sort of evolves over time, I do see that sort of activity moving to a place where you are scanning your NFT to get access to the event. That is essentially serving as your ticket, and based on, virtue of showing your NFT, you're able to get some sort of access or benefit. Again, like that is not something that's on the near-term horizon, but I think as you think about the growth and evolution of NFTs and this activity and relationships with large IP holders, like that is mutual benefit that both Ticketmaster and the consumer would get by virtue of sort of interlocking, real-time ticketing with NFTs. Again, not on the near term, but something that I feel like is a fairly obvious direction for things to go.
So maybe last question on this, and this might even be more for you. In terms of the obstacles that exist today, in your opinion, to having that super seamless experience that would guarantee that 10 million people could have this amazing ticket to post-benefit experience, like what are those obstacles right now to making sure that that can be really smooth and we're like consumer ready as an industry?
Yeah, honestly, the biggest last one that I think is massive is the mobile story, right? Like we talk about Web3 and the experience in Web3, like literally on a web browser, it's reasonably defined at this point in time. But the mobile answer, we don't have a good mobile answer, right? Of like what happens if you want to go and download the Ticketmaster app and have NFTs in your app. If you want to go and download a game that is, that has some on-chain component, how does that all work, right? And obviously there's teams like Wallet Connect that we've worked really closely with that make that work, make it possible for wallets to talk to mobile apps. But right now it's really clunky. And so that's actually something we're tackling with a thing we're introducing called hybrid custody. So, you asked the question, and it was one of the pieces that Adam didn't get to was like, where are these NFTs, right? Like when somebody goes into Ticketmaster. So that's app custody, right? You have a login with Ticketmaster. You already have a relationship with Ticketmaster. The idea that you would be asked to go off and create another wallet just to get this commemorative ticket, that's adding friction. That's making it more difficult for people to get into this. And they might understand the value of getting a digital memento, but the more friction you put in front of that, the harder it is. So what they've done, and a lot of companies do this, is they've just said, hey, look, we'll create a wallet for you. So there's millions of Ticketmaster created wallets on Flow, and that's where those NFTs live. That's a great onboarding story. That's not a good interoperability story, right? Like I sign up for 10 different apps. I have 10 different wallets with 10 different logins. Now I want to go to a marketplace and start trading those things. And like, what? Do I have 10 logins to trade all these apps? And so what we're doing with hybrid custody is we're creating a mechanism in the base layer of Flow where we're saying that one account can have sort of remote control over another account. You can call this delegation. We call it a parent-child relationship. But imagine what happens when you sign up for Ticketmaster. And I don't know for sure that Ticketmaster is going to do this. And as I said, Ticketmaster is building their own technology. But presuming that Ticketmaster, really wants to see this thing all the way through, what they'll do is you go in, you log in your Ticketmaster account, we create an account for you. But later, when you come along with whether it's your Dapper wallet, whether it's your Blockto wallet, whether it's your Lilico wallet, right? And by the way, those last two are fully self-custody wallets. I know people think that everything on Flow is custodial. It is not. Lilico is a mobile app that actually uses the secure enclave in your phone to store your keys. So you come along with your Lilico app and you go to Ticketmaster and you say, hey, I want my self-custody wallet that I own the keys for I want you to delegate your account to that. And what's cool about this is that it means that I now have access to all of those assets from my self-custody wallet with keys that I control on my own device. I can go to a marketplace and I can trade those assets without having to log into Ticketmaster. But unlike having to move those assets out of Ticketmaster into that wallet, next time I log into Ticketmaster, that anything I haven't sold or anything I bought is already there. And so I'm not constantly bouncing stuff back and forth between my self-custody wallet and the app custody wallet. We have aspects that are hybrid custody. And when you're using your self-custody wallet, you have access to all of those children accounts. But when you're in the app, you only have access to the stuff that's in that app. And so it's a really strong security model.
It's really interesting.
Yeah.
There's a couple things that come to mind. The first one is, even aside from being able to trade these kinds of tickets, what's always felt so promising or like the no-brainer to me with NFTs is like, and I always think about it in the context of a dating app, right? Right now, if you go on a lot of people's dating, Hinge profiles or whatever, right? Like they'll link out to their Instagram account. And to me, what a no-brainer that you link out to your wallet. And like, what's a better way to get a sense of who somebody is than the concerts they've spent money on and the sports games they've gone to, and like the social signaling, this is who I am, this is my identity element of these things, I think is huge. And so my concern with 10, you've got some over here on Ticketmaster, someone is that you can't now do that. There's no central place where my friends can go and see, okay, I go to a Taylor Swift concert and this is where I get my coffee and whatever. And so does this solve that? Like, would they show up in that parent wallet, or is it more?
Yeah, because what I just described, you could potentially do just by like having keys, like shared keys. But what we've explicitly done is we're adding a link on chain between the two accounts. And so, yeah, absolutely. You'll be able to, if you look at my Ticketmaster account, you'll be able to see what the parent account is that controls that. And then you'll be able to see all the other children account associated with it. And so then when I go to like Gaia Marketplace, the Gaia Marketplace can see all of the assets in all of my
can show off
accounts.
Everything in one marketplace.
Yeah.
The other question I have here, and this actually gets us to Cryptoys, who I referenced earlier, one of the things that I love about Cryptoys is they have this clear viewpoint. So like I've always said, like in some ways Cryptoys is what they're doing looks like what a lot of other PFP projects maybe have done, right around like the game and an IP and whatever, but they're coming at it from a different vantage point, which is these are toys, and we have this very particular family-friendly angle. Sorry, my camera just cut out. It'll probably pop right back on. It's so annoying. It's not like I don't do this for a living every day, and sometimes it's not an issue, and sometimes it is an issue. If you're listening on the podcast and don't know what I'm talking about, my camera just went out, and I'm going to keep going because it'll probably pop back on.
I like the 1970s style.
I know. I did not preset what it looks like.
Man on the moon.
Yeah. So. So they take this very family-friendly, like they're, this always sounds like a weird way to phrase it, but they're targeting kids, right? They're trying to build a toyetic experience, as they describe it, and these toys for like a LOL surprise doll. But then there gets to like, okay, kids controlling wallets. Like, could this be a solve there too of like basically parental controls? Or I think this is something that Cryptoys is looking at and was talking to Flo about, is like, is there an element where you can add that like parents can sort of have control of their kid's account on blockchain, so it's not just a kid running wild, just as you would put parental controls on a YouTube channel or TV?
Yeah, I think there's a few different ways that you could implement parental controls like that. So one of the features we built into the Flow account model was, what in Ethereum terms is referred to as account abstraction. Everything's an abstraction over there. But basically the idea that you can have multiple keys for an account, you can revoke keys, you can add keys, they can have different weights. And so you can imagine a system where, my kid has an account and I put, $20 in there, they can go nuts and do whatever they want with the $20. But when the $20 is gone, then they have to come and I have to approve, moving more money in, or, you could even imagine setting up some sort of an allowance where once a week they can come and get $20. But if they want to go above and beyond that, they have to get my approval. So all of that stuff is like facilitated by Flow's core protocols, but it's complicated to build that and build out the UI and whatnot. So we haven't seen anybody build that into their into the UI yet, but the underlying tech is there to support it.
Okay, last couple of questions, because I know we're running a little long here, and I really appreciate both of your time. I said it. I obviously have to ask a bit about Doodles too. Mm-hmm. I'm trying to decide which question is even the best way to ask this. Like, maybe here's one. Well, I guess I'm curious, and you guys are super biased, and I'm maybe throwing you a layup here, but like, why do you think you won that business? Obviously, Jordan Castro and the the OG Doodles founding team has a long relationship with Dapper and was on the Dapper team and on the CryptoKitties team. But what do you think was the selling point that made Flow win that business over Polygon and IMX and these others is perhaps the first question. And then second, I don't know if this is, are you guys on your side, on the Dapper Flow side, looking at any metrics on this partnership that would deem it a success to you? Or are you not even thinking along those terms because it's like, great, you got another project on Flow and there's the win, done?
Yeah, I mean, from both sides. I said earlier that I felt like whenever somebody took the time to understand Flow, they always came away impressed. Jordan, better known as Poopy, he didn't have much choice but to spend the time looking at Flow, right? It was being built while he was here. And so do I think the fact that he knew us, right, knew what the technology was, and had sort of been, listened to me talk about what we're trying to achieve and seeing that go from an idea to reality, of course that had an influence, but it wasn't just like, hey, these are my buddies. Like, I think it was just he had an opportunity to learn about exactly what we were doing. And I think he has the trust in the individuals involved that we're going to follow through on it, that it's not just a lot of talk, that we have both the intention and the capability to follow through on all of our promises. So I think that's sort of like, if you want to think of that as like some sort of nefarious plot, I suppose you could.
I wasn't trying to imply that.
No, not you, but certainly others on Twitter will. But I think the fact that he was here to see it being built is why he was able to explain to the rest of the team why it was so valuable to the project that they were trying to create.
Is there a quick summary you could give as to why, like, why is it so valuable for Doodles 2?
So, the big, obvious, immediate one is the better user experience. Our commitment to user experience goes right down to the protocol level. Talking about all the account abstraction and the key model, the way the keys work and the way the account model works. I think that's stuff that they see our commitment to a good user experience, and that's what they want as well. And so knowing that that's, that we've thought about that all up and down the stack, I think is encouraging to them. But just the nature of the product they want to create involves more complicated on-chain interactions and on-chain functionality. Flow was built for that, right? Flow was not built to do simple transaction. Flow was designed to handle complex interactions. And they really have, whether they get there or not, the ambitions are amazing. And they really want to create truly decentralized, blockchain mediated apps, games, interactions, social network. And I think, that's exactly what was in our minds when we were building Flow, is to enable a wide variety of applications and not just, hey, here's a way how you can, script moving money around. And so I think that was a big part of it is that, their ambitions are large, and they understand that we designed our blockchain to support large ambitions. From the other side, like how do we see it? One, it's awesome to see an established product, an established community coming into Flow. It's great to have a team that takes decentralization, and especially in the long term, very seriously, coming onto Flow. And obviously that's great for Flow. It's also great for Dapper, right? Like, Dapper Wallet is a business that is, there to facilitate great user experience, allow users to use their credit cards to engage in truly crypto experiences. And, so it's a great partnership there as well. But fundamentally, it's just such a great brand because it is so friendly, and it's, they care about the user experience, but they also just like have such a great positive vibe that, I couldn't be happier. Obviously it's awesome to see, somebody I consider a friend, doing well.
Of sorts.
Yeah, exactly. and coming and building on our technology. But also just like, there is a reason they didn't build on Flow and with the first version, right? They could have waited to build on Flow, and they again really committed to their users. They're like, look, they were excited about Flow's potential, but the potential wasn't there yet. And so I think that also means a lot to me too. Is that they it was a positive choice, right? Flow wasn't the default. It was something that they had to really be convinced by.
Last question. This is just big and broad. I mentioned this earlier. So y'all are the team that brought CryptoKitties to the ecosystem, which was like first opened people's eyes to just that blockchain could be more than money, basically. and of course broke Ethereum and, launched the ERC 721 standard. Then you had Top Shot, which I think introduced a whole new suite of people to NFTs and basically kicked off the most recent wave of NFTs that we've seen. What's next? Like, if anybody's poised, anyone has a track record to build the thing that brings the next million users on, it is probably Dapper. So give us the alpha, How are we getting out of this most recent bear, guys?
Stay tuned.
Yeah. Not a good answer. Your turn. Impressive.
Well, I will say this, that I'll tell you what, I can't tell you what we're doing, but I will tell you what I think is the next big unlock for people understanding and getting value out of this technology. And it is having more complicated functionality built on chain, right? It's one of the things that Doodles is trying to do. Obviously, it's something that is near and dear to my heart, right? When we made CryptoKitties, I was the one that really pushed for there to be a breeding mechanic, because I felt that, like, again, you got to find some way that owning the thing has value and not just selling the thing has value. And so the idea that there should be some sort of game where that's mediated on chain and where people can actually, talk, connect with somebody else, play a game, and have that whole game experience be running on the blockchain. I think that's a pretty big unlock, right? It's an unlock for users because there's, they get rid of trust issues. I can't tell you how many gamers have been burned by, a company shutting down a server or changing the way the game works, or, screwing up the game mechanics in some way, and them not being able to go back to an old version. And blockchain really, I think, solves a lot of those problems. So even though I think gamers are really, skeptical about NFTs, because, man, gamers is a community that has seen plenty of rent extraction through the years, and been seen as a pile of money and not an audience to be served. But I do think that when we have a team that wants to use this technology to serve that audience and to make their lives better instead of just trying to maximize the financial extraction from them, I think that it's perfect for creating social, expandable, extendable games that are autonomous, that don't depend on the existence or the benevolence of a company in order to keep working. And that, I think, is going to be a potential big unlock when it comes.
Yep. I think just to follow up on that too, other than saying stay tuned, I think to Deet's point, right, the notion of composability and building adjacent to, on top of, development that's already occurred, being a core tenet, obviously, of Web3, I think that is something we're going to continue to lean into in terms of improving the developer experience on Flow, but also the experience that developers can create, around some of our larger, core products is something we're hyper focused on too, right? So not necessarily thinking about those as church and state, but really thinking about how we can create better interconnectivity there between that experience and sort of, what the developer community can bring to that. Something we're really, really focused on, now, but also the longer term benefits of that.
Well, I appreciate you both very much. Thank you for coming on, for answering all these questions. And I guess I should say, I'll record a little intro maybe that I'll put before this, which is that I own Flow. People are always like, I own I weekly buy or monthly buy like a fairly trivial amount of Flow, but I do think you guys have a really clear and interesting value prop and obviously have a pretty impressive track record. So I guess I'm supposed to disclose that. I never disclose when I have an ETH project on that I own ETH, because I feel like that's just like kind of obvious, but maybe I'll put that for folks. So disclaimer. But yeah, I really appreciate you guys coming on and chatting with me, and would love to have you back as you all continue to build in the space.
This was fun. Thanks so much for having us.
Yeah, this was a blast. Thank you so much, and we'll look forward to doing it again sometime.
Thank you so much for watching this episode of Overpriced JPEGs. If you liked this conversation, if you liked this episode, please go ahead and hit subscribe. It helps me out, it helps the show out, and it means you will get alerts and updates when we post new content. Thanks again.